You're standing in line at the grocery store checkout. The total comes to $147.83. You hand over your card, and as you're walking out, you realize you forgot to use the store's loyalty program. You just missed out on saving $2.14. And for the next 20 minutes, driving home, unloading groceries, putting things away, that $2.14 eats at you, you feel like you failed. Meanwhile, sitting in your driveway is a car with a $680 monthly payment that you honestly can't afford, parked in front of a house that stretches your budget so thin you're one emergency away from panic. But you're upset about the $2. This is the cheap mentality in action, and it's bankrupting you in ways you don't even realize. My name is Nick, and what I'm about to show you isn't another lecture about cutting expenses or skipping overpriced coffee. This is about the psychological trap that keeps people broke even when they think they're being financially responsible. Because here's the truth most won't tell you. Being cheap is an emotional reaction rooted in fear. Being wealthy is a strategic calculation of value. Until you understand the difference and make the switch, you'll stay stuck no matter how hard you pinch pennies. Let me give you the most perfect example of cheap thinking destroying wealth. You're driving around town and you see two gas stations. One is selling regular unleaded for $3.89 a gallon. The other one, 15 minutes across town, is advertising $3.79. You make the decision, and you're going to drive those extra 15 minutes to save 10 cents per gallon. Feels smart, right? You're being responsible with money. Let's actually do the math. Your car has a 15-gallon tank. At 10 cents savings per gallon, you just saved $1.50. Congratulations. Except you didn't. That 15-minute drive across town, or that's 30 minutes round trip. Your car gets about 25 miles per gallon in the city. You burned roughly a gallon of gas making that trip, which at $3.79 cost you, $3.79. You spent $3.79 in half an hour of your life to save $1.50. You paid $2.29 for the privilege of feeling like you saved money. But it gets worse. What's your time worth? Let's say you make $25 an hour at your job. That half hour you spent hunting for cheap gas, that's $12.50 of your life you'll never get back. So the actual cost of your savings mission is $14.79 in lost time and fuel. You turned a $1.50 savings into a $14.79 expense, and you felt good about it the entire drive. This is what I mean when I say being cheap is a psychology problem, not a math problem. The cheap person asks one question and one question only: how much does this cost right now? Every dollar leaving their hand feels like a loss, a defeat, a step backward. The wealthy person asks a completely different question. What is the return on this investment? They view money as a tool to produce a result, not a scoreboard to be protected. Consider networking events. A cheap mindset looks at a $50 ticket to a professional mixer and sees $50 walking out the door for mediocre appetizers and awkward small talk. Wasteful, frivolous, not happening. A wealthy mindset sees that same $50 and calculates differently. If I meet one person at this event who knows about a job opening, or one potential client, or one mentor who gives me advice that changes my career trajectory, that $50 could return $50,000. The ROI isn't the finger food, it's the access. And here's what makes this shift possible: security. When you have an actual emergency fund, when you have even 3 months of expenses saved, your brain stops operating from a place of fear. You stop seeing every purchase as a potential financial death sentence. That mental safety net is what allows you to stop acting cheap and start acting strategic. Now let's talk about the obsession that's infected the entire personal finance world: the coffee. Oh, the coffee. How many times have you heard that cutting out your daily latte is the secret to wealth? Skip Starbucks, make it at home, and you'll retire a millionaire. It's the most repeated advice in the game, and it's mostly garbage. Like, yes, technically making coffee at home instead of buying it saves money. If you're spending $5 a day on coffee, that's $1,825 a year. Brew it yourself for pennies and you pocket the difference. But let's be honest, that $1,825 annually isn't making you rich. It's not nothing, sure, but it's not changing your life either. Meanwhile, the person agonizing over whether they can afford a $5 coffee is completely ignoring the $47,000 SUV in their driveway with a $680 monthly payment. They're obsessing over the latte while hemorrhaging money on car depreciation, insurance they can barely afford, and premium fuel. They'll debate for 10 minutes whether to buy the name brand cereal or the store brand to save 80 cents, then go home to a house that costs $400 more per month than they should be paying. This is the cheap trap. Sweating the small stuff while ignoring the massive financial leaks. You're bailing water out of the boat with a teaspoon while there's a gaping hole in the hull. And there's another cost nobody talks about: decision fatigue. Every single time you stand in a store aisle calculating per ounce pricing on pasta sauce, every time you drive across town comparing gas prices, every time you agonize over whether the generic trash bags are good enough, you are burning mental energy. Your brain has limited bandwidth. It's got a finite amount of RAM available each day for decisions. When you waste that processing power on whether to save 30 cents on paper towels, you have nothing left for the decisions that actually matter. Should you negotiate your salary? Your brain's too tired. Should you start that side business? You can't think about it. Still recovering from the grocery store calculations. Should you learn a new skill that could double your income? Maybe tomorrow. You spent all your decision-making energy on trivial purchases. Here's a rule that will change your financial life. If a purchase is under $20 and you have savings in the bank, buy the one you want and move on. Save your brain power for the $20,000 decisions. That's where wealth is actually built or destroyed. The car you buy, the house you choose, the career moves you make, the investments you prioritize. But we need to go deeper because there's a reason cheap thinking feels smart, even when it's costing you everything. And that reason has a name: the scarcity mindset. This is the invisible prison that keeps people cheap, even when it's costing them a fortune. Scarcity mindset is the deep-seated belief that there will never be enough. Not enough money, not enough opportunities, not enough time. When you operate from scarcity, every dollar spent feels like a permanent loss. You're not buying a pair of shoes, you're losing $80 forever. You're not investing in a skill, you're throwing away money you might need for an emergency. This fear-based thinking creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. And look, I get it. Maybe you grew up watching your parents fight over money. Maybe you graduated into a recession. Your brain learned to hoard resources to survive. That behavior kept you safe back then, but it's keeping you stuck now. You're so terrified of running out of money that you make decisions that guarantee you'll stay broke. You refuse to spend $1,000 on a professional certification that could increase your salary by $15,000 a year, because what if something bad happens and you need that $1,000? Meanwhile, someone with an abundance mindset sees that same $1,000 as seed money. They plant it knowing it'll grow into something bigger. They're not reckless, they're strategic. They understand that calculated risk beats guaranteed stagnation every single time. The language you use reveals which mindset you're operating from. Cheap people say, "I can't afford that." It's a declaration of powerlessness. You're a victim of circumstances. Wealthy people say, "I'm choosing not to spend on that right now because I'm prioritizing something else." Same decision, completely different psychology. One is scarcity. One is empowerment. Words matter because they shape how you see yourself. If you constantly tell yourself and others that you can't afford things, you're reinforcing an identity of financial inadequacy. You're programming yourself to stay small. But there's another layer to this that most people completely miss. Now let's talk about the most expensive form of being cheap: refusing to invest in yourself. This is where the damage becomes irreversible. A cheap person won't spend $500 on an online course that teaches a high-income skill because that's too much money for information. So they stay stuck in a job they hate, making $45,000 a year, convincing themselves they're being financially responsible. Meanwhile, someone else takes that same course, learns the skill, and within a year they're freelancing for $80 an hour. The cheap person saved $500. The strategic person earned an additional $30,000. 5 years later, the gap is catastrophic. One person is still pinching pennies, the other bought a house, same starting point, different philosophy. Or consider health. Cheap people skip the dentist because a cleaning costs $150. They ignore the cavity. 2 years later, it's a root canal. That's $1,500. They still can't afford it, so they let it get worse. Now it's an extraction and an implant. $4,000. That initial $150 investment would have prevented all of it. But here's the twist. It's not just about the money, it's about the pain, the missed work, the diminished quality of life. Being cheap extracted a physical toll. This pattern repeats everywhere. Skipping the annual physical, ignoring the weird noise your car is making, buying the absolute cheapest mattress because you spend a third of your life asleep. But sure, save $200 and wake up with back pain for the next decade. The wealthy mindset asks a different question. What is the cost of not doing this? What's the cost of staying ignorant? What's the cost of poor health? What's the cost of a broken down car when you need to get to an interview? Suddenly, spending money to prevent problems looks like the bargain of the century. Let me introduce you to a concept that separates people who build wealth from people who stay stuck. It's called return on investment, and it applies to everything, not just stocks. When you buy something, you're not just spending money, you're making a trade. Money for time, money for capability, money for peace of mind. Wealthy people calculate that trade. If I spend $1,200 on a reliable laptop, how much time will I save not dealing with crashes? How many opportunities will I capture because I can work efficiently? How much will I earn because I look professional on video calls? They're not asking if they can afford it. They're asking if they can afford not to have it. You know, cheap people see the $1,200 and panic. That's rent. That's groceries. They buy the $300 budget laptop instead. It's slow. It freezes during presentations. The camera is garbage. It dies in 18 months. They buy another cheap one. Over 5 years, they've spent $1,000 on inferior machines and lost countless hours to frustration. The math is brutal, but it's real. Now, I need to address something before you misunderstand me completely. I'm not telling you to go out and blow money on everything. Strategic spending is not the same as reckless spending. The goal isn't to become financially irresponsible. The goal is to stop being penny wise and pound foolish. You still need a budget. You still need to live below your means. But within that framework, you make decisions based on value, not just price. You ask, will this purchase make my life materially better? Will it save me time I can use to earn more? Will it prevent a bigger expense down the road? If the answer is yes, and you have the money available, the wealthy choice is to spend it. Because here's what nobody tells you about wealth building. You cannot shrink your way to wealth. Cutting expenses has a ceiling. You can only reduce your spending so much before you're living in a cardboard box eating ramen. But income is unlimited. The real game isn't about spending less on coffee. It's about building the machine that generates more money. And that requires a completely different operating system in your brain. Most people never make that switch. They stay trapped in cheap thinking their entire lives, convinced that if they just cut enough expenses, they'll somehow stumble into wealth. But here's the reality nobody wants to hear. You're not going to budget your way to financial freedom by skipping the coffee. You're going to get there by investing in yourself, your skills, your network, and your capacity to earn. Let me give you a framework that changed how I think about every dollar. It's simple. Every time you're about to make a purchase, ask yourself 3 questions. First, will this purchase save me time? Second, will it increase my earning capacity? Third, will it prevent a larger expense later? If the answer to any of those questions is yes, and you have the money available, that's not an expense. That's an investment disguised as spending. A $500 online course that teaches you a skill worth $50,000 more per year, that's not expensive. That's the bargain of the decade. A $200 pair of professional shoes that makes you look competent in client meetings, not a luxury, a business expense, a $1,000 ergonomic office chair that prevents chronic back pain and lets you work comfortably for 10 years. That's healthcare you're paying for upfront instead of in emergency room bills later. The cheap person looks at these numbers and sees money leaving their account. The wealthy person sees leverage, efficiency, and compounding returns. It's the same transaction, but the mental framework is completely different. One perspective keeps you broke. The other builds wealth. Now, I need to address the social cost of being cheap because this is where things get really uncomfortable. Your relationships have economic value, not in a manipulative way, but in a practical sense. The people you know, the way you treat them, the reputation you build. These things open doors or close them permanently. Cheap people undertip servers. They split restaurant bills to the penny. They show up to parties empty-handed. They borrow things and never return them. They're always the one who conveniently forgets their wallet, and they think they're being smart, saving money. But what they're actually doing is buying a reputation. The reputation spreads. People stop inviting them. Opportunities dry up. Professional connections fade. That saved $20 on the dinner bill just cost you a $100,000 job referral you'll never even know you missed. Wealthy people understand that generosity is an investment. Picking up the tab occasionally, tipping well, bringing a nice bottle of wine. These aren't wasteful expenditures. They're relationship capital. They're building a network of people who remember how you made them feel, who think of you when opportunities arise, who want to help you succeed because you've demonstrated that you value them. The math is invisible, but it's real. Being cheap might save you a few $100s a year in social situations. Being generous and strategic in your relationships can generate tens of thousands in unexpected opportunities, partnerships, and goodwill. It's not even close. Here's where we need to talk about the identity shift, because this is the deepest level. Being cheap isn't just a set of behaviors, it's an identity you've constructed. It's a story you tell yourself about who you are and what you deserve. Every time you say, I can't afford that, you're not making a factual statement about your bank balance. You're reinforcing a self-concept. Language matters more than you think. Cheap people use powerless language. I can't afford it. That's too expensive. I wish I could, but it's the vocabulary of scarcity, of victimhood, of being at the mercy of circumstances. Wealthy people, even when they're choosing not to spend, use empowered language. I'm choosing to allocate my resources elsewhere. That doesn't align with my current priorities. I'm investing in something else right now. Notice the difference? One is passive, helpless. The other is active, strategic. Same decision, completely different mental framework. And your brain listens to the stories you tell it. If you constantly frame yourself as someone who can't afford things, your subconscious will work to make that story true. It will find ways to keep you broke because that's the identity you've claimed. But if you start telling yourself a different story, if you start speaking and thinking like someone who makes strategic resource allocation decisions, your brain will start solving for that instead. It will look for opportunities to earn more. It will spot inefficiencies. It will calculate ROI. The shift in language creates a shift in thinking, which creates a shift in behavior, which creates a shift in results. So here's your homework. Audit your spending for the last 3 months. Not to shame yourself, but to find the pattern. Where are you being cheap in ways that cost you more long-term? Where are you spending money that generates zero return? Where are you bleeding cash on big structural things while obsessing over small things? Then make one change, just one. Stop agonizing over purchases under $20 if you have savings. Buy the thing you actually want and redirect that mental energy toward figuring out how to make an extra $1,000 this month. That one shift will do more for your wealth than a decade of coupon clipping. You cannot shrink your way to wealth. You can only grow your way there. Stop focusing on the $5 leaving your pocket and start focusing on the thousands that could be entering it. That's the difference between cheap and wealthy. One is playing defense with pennies, the other is playing offense with strategy.